Welcome back, bosses, to Boss Economics World, where we cut through the economic nonsense, expose government mismanagement, and reveal how the so-called experts are tanking your wallets, your jobs, and your future. I'm your host, the boss of economics, here to break down the latest Fed fiasco, roast the policy clowns, and show you why we're on a one-way train to Recessionville, all while the suits in Washington pat themselves on the back. Buckle up, because today, we're diving into the Federal Reserve's latest circus act, a masterclass in indecision, delusion, and economic destruction. Alright, bosses, let's talk about the Federal Reserve's latest meeting on June 18, 2025, a meeting that was supposed to give us clarity but instead gave us a front-row seat to the biggest clown show in town. The Fed, in all its infinite wisdom, decided to keep the benchmark federal funds rate parked at 4.25%. 4.5%. No cuts, no hikes, just nothing. They've been sitting on their hands since the start of the year, watching the economy crumble, inflation spike, and unemployment creep up, all while whistling past the graveyard. And their big plan? 2 measly rate cuts, in 2025. That's right, folks, the Fed's grand strategy is to wait until next year to maybe, possibly, kinda sorta do something. But here's the kicker, they can't even agree on that. 7 of these geniuses now say no cuts this year, up from 4 in March, while 10 others are still dreaming of a double-cut fairy tale by year-end. This isn't a central bank, it's a reality TV show, Survivor, Interest Rate Island. And who's left holding the bag? You, me, and every hardworking American trying to pay their bills while the Fed plays economic roulette. Now, let's give credit where it's due, or rather, blame where it's due. Fed Chair Jerome Powell, the ringmaster of this circus, had the audacity to tell reporters, "We're well positioned to wait to learn more about the likely course of the economy before considering any adjustments to our policy stance." Translation: we have no idea what's going on, so we're just gonna sit here and hope the problem fixes itself. Brilliant, Jerry. Meanwhile, the economy is screaming for help, and all we get is a masterclass in procrastination. Now, let's zoom out and look at the elephant in the room, or rather, the tariff-shaped grenade lobbed into the economy by none other than President Donald Trump. Back in April 2025, Trump unveiled a sweeping set of tariffs, touting them as the silver bullet to protect American jobs and stick it to China. Sounds great, right? Wrong. These tariffs are a textbook example of government mismanagement, and the Fed's latest forecasts prove it. According to the Fed's updated projections, economic growth in 2025 is now expected to limp along at a pathetic 1.4%, down from their earlier pie-in-the-sky estimate of 1.7%. Inflation? Oh, that's now projected to hit 3% by year-end, up from 2.7%. And unemployment? Say hello to 4.5%, up from their previous guess. Let me break this down for you, bosses. Tariffs are choking growth, jacking up prices, and killing jobs. And what's the Fed's response? Oh, let's just wait and see. Here's the deal, tariffs don't protect anything, they punish. They punish American businesses by raising the cost of imported goods, which means higher production costs. They punish consumers by jacking up prices on everything from groceries to electronics. And they punish workers by slowing economic activity, leading to layoffs and hiring freezes. Don't believe me? Let's look at the data. According to a 2025 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBR, Trump's latest tariffs are expected to increase consumer prices by an average of 1.2% annually, costing the average American household an extra $1,300 per year. Meanwhile, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce estimates that these tariffs could slash GDP growth by 0.5% in 2025 alone. And yet, Trump's out there on X, formerly Twitter, screaming, the Fed needs to cut rates now. Yeah, Don, maybe if you didn't light the economy on fire, we wouldn't need the Fed to play firefighter. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the Fed's dilemma, a dilemma they've dug themselves into, thanks to years of mismanagement and kowtowing to political pressure. On one hand, inflation is rearing its ugly head, fueled by tariffs and supply chain disruptions. The Fed's own forecast of 3% inflation by year-end is bad enough, but let's not kid ourselves, that's a rosy estimate. Look at the latest Consumer Price Index, CPI, data. In May 2025, core CPI, which strips out volatile food and energy prices, rose by 3.4% year-over-year, the highest since mid-2023. And with tariffs set to push prices even higher, we're staring down the barrel of 4% inflation by early 2026, according to projections from Goldman Sachs. On the other hand, economic growth is tanking. The Fed's downgrade of GDP growth to 1.4% is a flashing red warning sign, and it's not hard to see why. Businesses are scaling back investment due to higher costs and uncertainty, while consumers are tightening their belts as inflation eats into their purchasing power. Just look at the latest retail sales data. In May 2025, U.S. retail sales grew by a measly 0.1% month-over-month, the weakest pace since the post-COVID recovery. And don't even get me started on the manufacturing sector. The ISM Manufacturing Index fell to 48.5 in June 2025, signaling contraction for the third straight month. So, what's a central bank to do? If the Fed raises rates to combat inflation, they risk choking off what little growth we have left, potentially tipping US into a full-blown recession. But if they cut rates to boost growth, they risk letting inflation spiral out of control, eroding savings and hammering the middle class. This, bosses, is what economists call a policy trap, and it's a trap the Fed walked right into, thanks to years of ultra-low rates, unchecked government spending, and now, Trump's tariff tantrum. Let's talk about the human cost of this mess, because while the suits in Washington and Wall Street are busy playing number games, real people are losing their livelihoods. The Fed's forecast of 4.5% unemployment by year-end might sound manageable to the ivory tower crowd, but let's put that in perspective. That's up from 4.1% at the start of 2025, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. And here's the kicker, the BLS's U6 measure of unemployment, which includes underemployed and discouraged workers, is already at 8.3% as of May 2025, the highest since late 2022. Now, let's connect the dots. Tariffs are driving up costs, which forces businesses to cut back on hiring or even lay off workers. At the same time, inflation is eating into consumer spending, which means lower sales for businesses, which means more layoffs. It's a vicious cycle, and the Fed's wait-and-see approach is doing nothing to stop it. Just look at the latest job openings and labor turnover survey, JOLTS, data. Job openings fell to 7.8 million in May 2025, down from 8.5 million a year ago, signaling a cooling labor market. Meanwhile, layoffs spiked by 15% year over year, with the manufacturing and retail sectors hit hardest. And here's the real tragedy, the government's response is either non-existent or actively making things worse. Trump's tariffs are a direct attack on American jobs, yet he's out there claiming, we're winning. Meanwhile, Congress is too busy playing partisan ping-pong to pass any meaningful stimulus or relief. And the Fed? Well, they're just waiting to learn more. Tell that to the single mom who just lost her job at the factory, or the small business owner who can't afford to keep the lights on. This, bosses, is what happens when you let ideology and incompetence run the show. Now, let's zoom out even further, because this isn't just America's problem, it's the world's problem. Trump's tariffs are sparking a global trade war, and the fallout is already hitting our trading partners. China, the EU, and Canada have all retaliated with their own tariffs, targeting U.S. exports like agriculture, manufacturing, and tech. According to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, global trade growth is expected to slow to 2.5% in 2025, down from 3.1% in 2024, largely due to the U.S.-led tariff escalation. And here's the kicker, a slowing global economy means less demand for U.S. exports, which means even slower growth and more job losses here at home. Just look at the latest export data. U.S. exports fell by 4.2% year over year in May 2025, the sharpest drop since the COVID-19 pandemic. Farmers in the Midwest are getting crushed, with soybean exports to China down 20% since the tariffs kicked in. And yet, Trump's out there claiming, trade wars are easy to win. Yeah, Don, tell that to the family farm that just filed for bankruptcy. Alright, bosses, let's wrap this up with the boss's verdict, the unfiltered truth you won't hear from the mainstream media or the government PR machine. This economic mess is a textbook case of government mismanagement, and the Fed is complicit in the crime. Trump's tariffs are a reckless, ideologically driven disaster, strangling growth, jacking up prices, and killing jobs. Congress is AWOL, too busy grandstanding to do anything meaningful. And the Fed, under Powell's leadership, is asleep at the wheel, paralyzed by indecision and terrified of making a tough call. Here's the bottom line, we're on the brink of a serious recession, and no one in charge has a plan to stop it. The Fed's 2 cuts in 2025 fantasy is a joke. By the time they get around to cutting rates, the economy will already be in freefall. And don't even get me started on Trump's delusional claim that the Fed is always late. No, Don, the problem isn't the Fed, it's you, your tariffs, and your refusal to take responsibility for the chaos you've unleashed. So, what's the solution, bosses? First, we need to scrap these tariffs before they do any more damage. Second, the Fed needs to wake up, stop waiting to learn more, and start cutting rates now, not next year. And third, Congress needs to get off its collective backside and pass targeted relief for workers and small businesses, not more handouts for corporate cronies. But don't hold your breath, because if history is any guide, the clowns in charge will keep fiddling while Rome burns. Alright, bosses, that's all for today's episode of Boss Economics World. If you're as fed up as I am with this economic insanity, smash that like button, subscribe, and share this video with every hardworking American who deserves better. And remember, here at Boss Economics World, we don't just report the news, we expose the truth. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and stay the boss of your own economics. Peace out.